Gotcha. All right. Hey, Alderwoman, how are you?
Hi.
Hey, Julius and Aaron, how y'all doing today?
Well, how y'all doing?
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, welcome back, everyone. We're here Saturday at noon, the Watchdogs, and we have two great guests who can provide some insight on our topic today. And we'll be talking about a national crisis, and that is violent crime. I think we hear a lot about COVID-19 and how that is a pandemic across the world. But right here in America and in many of our communities, we have another pandemic, and that's a surge in violent crime, where we see a number of assaults, aggravated assaults, violent crimes on the rise. And in some communities that we will learn about today, there's no real solution to combat that. And hopefully today we can talk about that and maybe even offer some of our law enforcement folks some ideas that will be more tangible than some that we're seeing, especially here in our community of Savannah. And so, Julius, I think we'll kick it off today by just getting some reactions from everyone about, as we see this surge in violent crime, Alderwoman Gibson Carter and Aaron, what are you all, well, how are you all reacting? And what are you hearing in your own families and your communities? And just personally and professionally, how are you all reacting to what we're seeing?
That's a great question, and I'm glad you started with that question because I want the listening audience, I want all of Savannians, people whose lives have been touched by crime and those who think they may be exempt or protected from such because of their economic status, where they live or where they work. We live in Savannah, Georgia. And so less than what's going on across the nation, as a sitting older person for the city of Savannah, I'm more concerned about what's going on here in our corridors. Because you see, in order for us to be the change we want to see, we have to start in our own community. And so that's a great question. What are we doing? Question number one. Number two is, what have we done since the last time we had a surge in crime and gun violence in our community? Question number three, what have we done as elected officials that previous administrations did or didn't do? And you start to see why we're in the place that we're in. So to answer your question, Mr. Bryant, we aren't doing anything as an administration. as a sitting older person who has been somewhat strapped by a rule of council that handicaps and cripples me when it comes to promoting and proposing those policies that would be consistent with freeing our streets from crime, gun violence, both structural and foundational. We recognize that there are multi-causisms of what exists in our community where these deficiencies are concerned. And so with respect to that, we have to know that we have to have a multifaceted approach when reducing gun violence and crime in our community. Not only does it start with making sure that parents know where their children are, or saying that mothers should be responsible for understanding that their children shouldn't have friends with guns or are guns in your room. We can't put those lofty ideals on a public who is essentially crippled by and victimized by the very deprivation that this administration and governmental entities create. If we are not doing anything to tackle those issues related to what we all know as practitioners, social workers, law enforcement, those in our judicial systems, even in our medical communities, we know what the causes of crime are. This poverty, right? If we haven't done one thing as an administration to tackle poverty, how do you tackle poverty? Start with wages. What have we done? What I have done to tackle wages and poverty is introduce or attempted to introduce policy that's consistent with a wage resolution. As a locality, we can't do very much about raising the minimum wage here in Savannah because of our state statutes. But what we can do is, just as we use our political influence and our positions to promote developers and contractors and to create opportunity for others, we can use our political influence to say to our partners who, particularly those who use our city's credit card, say, every individual who work within your establishment, you have to start them off with a livable wage consistent with $15 to $20 an hour. We are living in an insanity situation when we have an expectation that mothers can take care of their children, particularly single mothers, when they are cleaning beds and making toilets for $10 an hour, having to go to a second job, right, only to leave the children home. So that's my long answer to your simple question.
So I think I'm not in the Savannah area. I'm in the Metro Atlanta area, and I'm sure you guys have seen that this surge in crime. And it's Alderwoman, I like that you mentioned that economic status, and people have this understanding, I guess this notion that the more money you have, there's this assertion that you're exempt from those things, and we're starting to see the complete opposite of that, because you have places like Buckhead where it's one of the wealthiest areas in the city. One of the wealthiest zip codes in the state is in that Buckhead area, and they're seeing massive surges in crime. And so what's happening is, even though Atlanta is a city with zoning, you're starting to see things overlap. Like it's almost like as if there is no zoning as it pertains to violence and crime. And so it used to be there were certain zones that were more prone to violence. And so now you're not seeing that anymore. And so that's how, and the funny thing is now that and maybe it's not funny, but we know it's intentional. Now that it's in the zones where it's not expected to be, now it's considered a problem. Now it's considered, something that deserves attention. And it is, how do we combat poverty? That we know. You can do a quick Google search. What's the cause of crime? What's the cause of violence? And poverty is going to be the number one answer. I know because I just did it. Just to kind of get a feel for what people in the world think. And so on a personal level, I have a niece that's 14. She'll be 15 soon. And so now, she's going to start exploring the city and driving and those types of things. And now we're having to have these conversations with her about where you go and when you are out, what you do, what you need to pay attention to. She can't just go to the mall anymore. Lennox Mall now has metal detectors. So it is crazy, and it's something that we have to address. And I think because it has not been addressed, and it has not been addressed appropriately, and it's been over policing in the wrong areas and with the wrong reasons and for the wrong people. We're seeing a problem now that's really hard to handle and even harder to mitigate than it would have been a few years ago.
And it's almost like they don't want to control it. I mean, you hate to say that, but it's almost like they don't want to control crime.
Mm-hmm.
The Alderwoman and the a couple other Alderwomen with her have been advocating for recreation, advocating for some type of leisure activities for these kids to get involved with at an earlier age so that they'll have something that they can look forward to. But it seems like they don't want to do that. They spent $1.2 million on a park yesterday and did more work on the dog park area, the dog walk area than anything. They spent $17 million putting some new bricks. $17 million putting new bricks on Broughton Street, but they can't say that they want to open up the gym and staff these places so that these kids can have an outlet. If they don't go to these places for their recreation, then their recreation will become, we will become their recreation. They will prey on the vulnerable, and because the gang's gonna get them, and everybody else, the other element that we don't want to get them will get them. Nobody's listening except these women, and they're fighting for the people, and the people are fighting them. That's crazy.
Well, what it boils down to is you got certain leaders who sell out to the corporate greed. And that's when you have a problem right there. When your community focus becomes corporate focus and you forget about the reason why you're in leadership, you got a real issue there. You mentioned the money that was spent on the park and a waste of money down there to put some damn bricks on the ground. When right here we've got youth programs like Male Dreamers and others. Why not provide grants to those programs that are going to get these youth engaged in a productive way? The problem is when people don't have things to do, and the Alderwoman hit it, when people don't have an income, guess what they're going to do? They're going to do one or two things. They're going to go take it, or as I like to call, people call them drug dealers, I call them small business owners. They're going to start creating their own businesses in ways that we may not agree with. But guess what I want to do? I want to be engaged. I want to be a part of something, and I want to feed my family. So I just find it interesting that you mentioned that we are displacing money in places that do not have a strong impact, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So let me ask you all this: in the Savannah area, are you seeing that the sources of this crime or this violent crime it is younger people? Because in Atlanta, and I'm sure you all saw that Mayor Bottoms revealed a plan for the city to combat these violent crimes, and so reading that, it shows in the Metro Atlanta area that the source of crime is from individuals 25 and up. Actually, 70% of it is from individuals 25 and up. I think that obviously there's still some merit to providing access and exposure to positive, activities. But are you all seeing the opposite? Are you seeing younger individuals as the source of these crimes in your area?
Here in Savannah, it's younger. We do have a mix of that demographic as well, however, but the commonality in both you will find in Atlanta as well as here in Savannah is that it's oftentimes situational violence, right? Individuals are involved in intentional violent injury. In some politicians, lawmakers, and leaders in communities, they will hide behind, in order to give a false sense of safety to the community, they hide behind that fact when they say, well, these individuals knew each other. Oftentimes, you'll even hear reporters and anchors lead into a news story with that very fact, as if to say, you don't have to worry about your safety as long as you're not in Fraser Homes, as long as you're not frequenting Hitch Village, as long as you're not out after 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, you are essentially safe. But we know that bullets don't have a name. But more importantly, when we listen to that type of rhetoric, and whenever you hear seasoned politicians spew that kind of ignorance, it tells you that they devalue the lives of those individuals who are, in fact, being impacted, whether they are part of their own victimization or not. We know, again, that these families are struggling and suffering. You know, I had a unique circumstance where all of this has sort of come to a marriage, if you will, when you think about the haves and the have-nots, or when you think about those who think their lives may never be touched by this and those whose lives are touched by it. To date, I have 2 families who I served years ago, probably 15, 20 years ago, when I ran the Interfaith Hospitality Network Homeless Shelter. It's now called Family Promise. 2 of those mothers lost their sons over the last 2 years. They were between the ages of 20 and 21 years old. They were very good mothers. They were struggling mothers. And then I had the dynamic of having a local business owner who actually provided support to me financially through his business to aid in helping the homeless families and children I serve. And his son was killed to gun violence. So you see, there is no respect of person, but when we minimize it and when we reduce it down to the extent where we create this gaslighting scenario of trying to make people believe that you are sanitized in your sanctity as long as you don't leave the boundaries of, you know, whatever you deem as special, you won't be touched by it. But if we ascribe to the notion that we are our brother's keeper, and if we care about community, and if every life really does matter, we will then start to see the changes. Where we are concerned here in Savannah, there is no reason why crime and poverty should be what it is. I don't know if you knew, Mr. Abram, but we generate the most money for Georgia here in Savannah, only second to Atlanta. We have one of the wealthiest ports in the nation. We boast of being the tourist capital of the Southeast, the hospitable city of the South. With all of that wealth and all of that resource, we still are making up nearly over, actually, twice the national average in poverty. Our families are really struggling in this city. So why is that? Why is that? So when you start talking about national averages and trends of crime being up, I don't care what's happening in Charleston, New York, Atlanta, South Carolina, and all around us. What I care about is what's going on right here in Savannah, Georgia today, because we can effectuate the change that we need. And when you see a structural dynamic where there is a deliberate intent to change the rules to keep you from implementing and initiating and proposing those progressive and aggressive policies that will be consistent with changing these dynamics in our community, you have to ask the question, why? And shortly after you ask that question as an intelligent person, you will see that it's by design. It's by design.
One of the things that baffles me, especially here in the city of Savannah, actually the county, is we have, Aaron, we have all, you may not know, but Julius and Alderwoman know, we have about 3,000 task forces that have yet to put out any kind of report on anything productive, but I'll leave that there. But why don't we pull people around the table that have ideas, like your community organizations, churches, law enforcement officials that have real plans? Just pull people around the table and say, how do we work together to get this done? Instead of these, I almost said the wrong word, instead of these policies like the other one we're talking and saying, well, we want mommies to help us out. At the end of the day, that's not mommy's work. What it is the job of is to pull people around the table who have ideas, who have resources, and let's work together. I don't know if y'all have seen things like that, but why is that not at least a first step?
Well, we took that first step, Mr. Bryant, when they elected us and sent us to office. They sent a group of like-minded individuals to office. Well, they sent the appearance of what they thought were like-minded individuals to City Hall for that very fact. And it just didn't happen. And it didn't happen because you find in politics that most people, I believe, sincerely enter the world of politics from a place of altruism, seeking to do good. They genuinely want to make a difference. However, in short order, once they arrive, they find it very difficult to resist those things that are consistent with under the table and over the table deals. They get enamored with the madness of the media. They start taking the trips in the private jets and going to have dinner and lunch at the country club and the Chatham Club and the golf club. They get the fancy invitations to the Christmas dinners. You get to hobnob and rub elbows and shuck and jive, you know? It takes a very grounded person to resist that. It takes a person who is not greedy. It takes a person who's not beholden to anyone to resist all of that. And if you can't resist it, this is what you have when we now have these crises. And this whole notion of people not being able to work together, I say what I say to that is, you all did not send a group of elected bodies to Sunday school. You sent us into local government. You sent us to City Hall, where the likes of those type of gifts and favors can really ruin the spirit of service. And so whenever I'm asked the question about pulling together resources and collaborating with this group and that group, we are the local government. Every resource we need to effectuate change in this city is under the gold dome. Enough with the meeting, enough with the task force. Savannah can no longer wait for people to get in a room together and pontificate about what schools they went to and how many years they've been in law enforcement and in the judicial system and in social work, and what this agency is doing versus what that agency. Get over all of yourselves, put pen to paper, open up the coffers of all of our many accounts, both known and unknown, spend the money, and just for a moment, act as if it's the same money that you're giving to your friend who's a developer or a contractor or a special interest group. And let's just get to work. You laid it out at the beginning of your show. If we can expend millions of dollars on parts and for Dawgs and beautification of River Street, albeit, yes, I know that it comes from a different pot of money. But guess what? We can create the pot of money that it's supposed to come out of to move the needle where these foundational pieces are concerned that's really going to make the difference in our community. It just takes political will. And Mr. Bryant, I am reluctant to get caught up in being very critical of groups and committees and task force, because they certainly do have their place. But when we look at the fact that we are essentially resurrecting and basically reinstituting the same methods we employed 2, 5, and 10 years ago, come on, guys, let's just do it already.
That's right. One of the things that, and I want to give you credit for this, because I think some of our leaders don't get it, but you showed an example to Lit, which is Aaron, a program the Alderwoman started here in Savannah to clean up communities. I mean, it was a very strong program, but it took the Alderwoman saying, here's an idea, let's get some community organizations, fraternities and sororities, let's go clean up our city. It's just that simple. But when you have leaders that don't understand that, and you got people dying almost every day, you kind of wonder, well, why the hell did we elect you to be the leader of this municipality? Same thing, with the county. And so, Aaron, you mentioned earlier one of the initiatives that the Mayor Bottoms is initiating. Are what are some other strategies or pieces around that you've seen or that she's going to put into that component?
Well, it's based upon 9 different focuses, and it's a variation of different things. A lot of it seems a little theoretical to me, but how it's going to be deployed is interesting, and it will be interesting. They promised $70 million to um, this anti-violent crime, you know, movement, I guess. And so, what I thought was most interesting was that 50 million of it is public, and 20 million of it is private. So there are nonprofits, other non NGOs, and entities that have decided that it's important. And so I think that's what I think is amazing about it, is that okay, well, you have public and private entities that see this as an issue and want to help. On overall, it seems as such. But I also kind of challenge that, just because I feel like, as we stated earlier, it's because now it's more of an issue in communities that wouldn't otherwise be expected to have these issues, that it becomes this more important prevailing issue. And so, regardless of that, I wrote down some things that are in it, and it says, public awareness, community capacity, infrastructure building, expanding violence prevention, local security planning, and violent and focusing on violent repeat offenders. Two things that they mentioned specifically was more police officers. Atlanta, I think, has a shortage. They need about 400 more police officers, according to what the city has put out, and just small things like more street lights, identify, I guess, placards identifying, hey, be sure to watch out for this. Look over your shoulder if you see something, say something. It seems like there's this big push on engagement, being that it's everyone's responsibility. And I think if they can build some buy-in and create some buy-in within the community, I don't see why it wouldn't be effective and impactful. But again, we do have to see, like I said, a lot of it seems very theoretical, and so we'll see how it's deployed in practice. One of the other things that they mentioned is, enforcement of nuisance properties, and so basically using property law to, whenever there's an issue with something, like let's say your house is here and there's a house next to you that prevents, or that is somehow preventing safety for the community, then they're going to do more to enforce laws to, if you live next to a home that you suspect of, being drug dealing,
A trap house,
a trap house or whatever. So it's like, okay, well, pretty much providing more protections for people in their communities, and hopefully getting people motivated to say something, and to put some action behind their communities being safe. So yeah, I mean, it's a lot of things in there. I didn't get a chance to read all of it, but I definitely went through and kind of glanced over it. Some of the things they're seeing, and this is, I knew this was specifically about Buckhead, that this whole nuisance property thing. They mentioned after hours nightclubs. So that's interesting, because in Atlanta on Far Road, you have those areas, Far Road, Roswell Road, up there, where there have been some shootings, a lot of robberies, armed robberies, those types of things. And so now people are saying, now that the residents in those areas are saying that it's becoming harmful to them, and it's not providing a safe space for them. And so it's amazing how we see a direct response to that, and not so much a response to things that have already been happening in other areas.
And that would be the case here if they start doing things on the south side, more on Havisham Woods, places where they live. They would have the same reaction. The difference is, in Atlanta, they see this and they've already acted with the private and the government funds being put in to try to combat this. Where's the thinking here, with the leadership at the head, thinking how we can combat this. There isn't any except the Alderwoman. She's trying to get them at the table, but they don't want to talk to her. You can see it in everything that they do. Everything that they do, they try to make sure that this Alderwoman right here and Alderwoman, she's the Alderwoman for the entire city.
Right, at large.
Alderwoman Kesha Gibson Carter and Alderwoman Alicia Miller Blakely, at large Alderwomen. They don't want them to get any light whatsoever. And the press is a part of it. They do this on purpose, just like yesterday with the picture they took. I don't know whether Alderwoman Carter was going to talk about this or not, but they took a picture yesterday. I'll show it to you. You know, this is part of the whole problem. They don't understand that we see what they're doing. Look at this picture. This picture here. Now, all the women were there. I saw them live there with these gentlemen. What the hell the fire captain doing there? The city manager, he's there. You see the assistant city attorney. I don't know who the tall black guy is. And then you got the other aldermen. But this is crazy on how they left the two older women out. They were the most important ones there besides the mayor as far as positions. Mm-hmm. It's crazy. It's systematic.
Yeah, so you see how when your local government or you see how your local government can go from the most egregious of offenses that essentially holds back and restricts the voice of voters in terms of what the voters here in Chatham County did in 2019. Mr. Abram, they voted an entire council out. Only one person was left standing, and that was because they were not challenged. And a new council came in. That's the greatest indictment probably in the history of our Southeastern politics. And so with that notion, we find it hard pressed to sort of bring into focus these minor things like my cleanup campaign, which I can do more than cleanup, but for me, it's all about the mindset, changing the minds, the spirit, and the culture of our communities.
Right.
But that's essentially what my service has been relegated to. And the messiness of the media when they demonstrate what Mr. Hall pointed out by grossly avoiding our presence, which I get it. I got it. And I can take it. I'm a big girl. You know, this isn't my first rodeo. But at what juncture do we not hold accountable the media, who is responsible for the narratives that go out through our airways, both paper, print, as well as television? Like, they have a real responsibility to report accurately. And that within itself also impacts crime and our approach to it, because if they are not reporting it accurately, I believe at one point over, I can't remember, it was a few weekends ago, we had like 3 homicides in the city and not one media outlet covered it. You know, but you have an accusation of an older woman who supposedly used expletives, and you go on this like 48-hour news cycle. It's like I've never seen somebody's face and name plastered on the front pages and then be the lead news story on the 6 and 11 o'clock news more than I was, and I hadn't killed anybody or stolen money. Maybe that's what they're waiting for. But we cannot allow that to be the pervasive theme of what we do as a community when it comes to holding our government accountable. Yes, it's very laborious to fight to overcome all of the pieces that sort of rub you the wrong way. Can we do it? Yes. Is it fair? No. What we need the public to understand, however, is their rightful place in this work. Not only do they have a responsibility, they have a right. And I think that's the thing that's holding us back as of late, is people don't realize that they have a right to make these demands and make these challenges when it comes to how they speak to and hold their governments accountable. Mr. Abram, you were sort of giving us an example of some of the things that you all have done in Atlanta. And Mr. Bryant, you asked me a question, what are we doing? And I said to you, nothing, because we are not doing anything different. We haven't done anything in response. If our response to crime and gun violence in our community was a fraction of what our response was to COVID, I think we would be a model community. I think we would be a model community. If you compare the amount of airtime, the amount of resources, the amount of awareness and education to what we devoted to COVID, and we do it to gun violence and the people who are most adversely impacted by gun violence, we would set the tone for being a best practice community in how to tackle gun violence. And so, as your Alderwoman at large, if I were to have the opportunity to respond to this crime crisis, I will first tell you, Mr. Bryant, that I am not a reactionary leader. I'm a proactive leader. And so coming to the table at City Hall with over 25 years of experience of working on the front lines of the worst hurt our community has, our citizens experience, from senior nutrition insecurity to youth who are vulnerable and members of gangs, working with homeless families with children, to working with victims of rape and child molestation, domestic violence, as well as community organization and mobilization. You have to know that I not only have the knowledge base, but I have the experience of running very successful organizations. And so my ideals, I feel, would have served and can serve our community well. So let's just see, because this is generally what happens in this administration. I say something out loud or on the airways, it gets hijacked, and then the media makes it another older person's project or pet thing. I don't need the attention. I don't need the focus. So we're going to let them have it. But we're going to test them and see, because this is going to benefit the community. And I don't need the credit for anything. If we were to actively approach our crime and gun violence situation in Savannah with both a longitudinal approach as well as a short-term immediate response, it would look like this: engaging our retired police officers to incorporate a mentorship program, both for police officers who are on the force currently, as well as community policing for our vulnerable neighborhoods. You see, a police officer is a noble profession. And in today's society, that job has become the most difficult and scrutinized profession of all. We do know that we have a lot of bad police officers or police who operate outside of the parameters and rules that we would expect of a police officer. But at 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock in the morning, if we hear a bump in the night, I think all of us are going to call the police. Mr. Hall, you called the police when those people stole your signs at Port Wentworth.
Not funny, but yeah, I saw a video.
We are going to call the police. But the citizens in our community are as much a part of policing as our police officers are. And so we first have to start with that tone as we approach this whole notion of freeing our community of violence. We have to create a process whereby we start to heal these wounds where trust is concerned with our police department. And that's really, really easy to do. Outside of the situation where Mr. Harvey allegedly died in our Havisham Street barracks, we, for the most part, yes, really, we enjoy some semblance of harmony where police and citizens are concerned.
Yeah.
But incorporating those things that are consistent with working with our judicial system and strengthening those pieces related to keeping the violent offenders off the street, those people who we just can't do anything with, who are too far gone. And then instituting an aggressive recruitment and retention program for our police department that's going to be inclusive of recruiting people who live in Savannah and who predominantly look like the people who they police, because that's a real issue right now. And we have to get real about the numbers of police officers we actually need. Our police department is grossly, grossly understaffed. It's understaffed for our population alone in terms of who is registered and live here in Savannah, but it's also grossly underrepresented because we refuse to log those numbers that are consistent with the number of individuals who visit Savannah, who live in Savannah part-time, or the students who are not counted in those numbers, who use an enormous amount of our policing services. And so we have to make sure that we are engaging those partners to strengthen our police efforts as well. If we are recruiting those students who are graduating from the criminal justice department at Savannah State University, those kids are looking for a job out of college. They would jump at $40,000 or $50,000 to get 2 years of those loans down, right? But we're not doing that. Engage our faith communities, our local churches. Forget those pastors who just fly close to the flame for celebrity, and really connect with the pastors who have boots on the ground and who have been doing the work and who are willing to open the doors of their churches from 5 to 9 o'clock to bring in the youth from the streets. And even if the city have to invest in those churches to help them with those programs in the short term, let's do it. Remember, we are in a crime crisis, and crisis situations require resources. And then we revisit this all over again, incorporating our businesses, engage our tourism community to let them know that they too play a pervasive role in this. People didn't want me to say this out loud, and this is why I was unpopular at the Rape Crisis Center, but we had just as many tourists raped here in Savannah than we had people who lived here at the end of a given year. So, it's a myriad of issues and things, and those are just a few of the things I, as your Alderwoman at Large for Post 1 of the City of Savannah, if I were able to access our agenda process, I certainly, amidst a crime crisis, wouldn't be proposing aluminum cups, but that seemed to get the light of day. But some of the pieces that I have wanted to get on the agenda and get to light, and when I say this, oftentimes we say it as if people, everyday lay people, understand it. I get that, because I would not have gotten it before I came to City Hall. But what you need to understand is that agenda process is the first step within our administration that allows us to put a rule, an ordinance, a resolution on the books, get it adopted and implemented that will change your life. And if I am not able to, you may be saying, well, why haven't you done these things? I haven't done these things because the majority on council know that if any of these items were to see the light of day on that agenda, live and in public, our meetings are live and in public, and if they voted it down, it would be the greatest indictment on who they really are. So that's why they don't want you to see it, because they would have to vote for it. And then we would come close to having a community free of crime. Thank you.
Now, and I want to come back to that piece real quick, but one of the things I was really proud to see, Alderwoman, is at one of the council meetings, the accountability piece that you built in for the chief. And while we're not going to pick on the chief of police for the city, what baffles me is we got a chief of police for the county, we got a chief of police for the city, we have a sheriff, we have a chief of police at Savannah State, we have a chief of police at Georgia Southern. Why in the hell can we not have accountability where these people work together and build solutions, in addition to some of the things you mentioned? But if you could talk a little bit about that piece and what you learned and some of the things where you saw gaps when at the city council meeting, you held feet to the fire, and I'm glad someone did.
And that's why I led in when I started talking about task force committees and work groups, Mr. Bryant, that I didn't want to be too hypercritical of it, because they certainly have their place. And to that point, I want to acknowledge that our district attorney, Shalina Cook-Jones, is doing exactly what you just laid out. She's bringing together those individuals in law enforcement so that they can tackle it from a judicial and law enforcement perspective, because that's somewhat separate from what we can do as a municipality. Mm-hmm. And it's different from what our nonprofit and social services community can do as well. But when we're all in the same room on the same sheet of music, we can start to see an opportunity to tackle these issues in real time. Now, communities, inclusive of Savannah, we're not far into that dynamic. When I was at the Rape Crisis Center, we had there was what they called a multidisciplinary team that sort of was suspended when I started the organization in 2013. A big part of my role and work involved reinstituting this multifaceted team where each week we would come together and talk about the rape cases so that we can identify if there was commonality. You can imagine if that was not happening with us being a stone's throw from municipality to municipality, and with rapists being recidivist and sometimes mobile, you can imagine that a lot of them were falling through the cracks. But when you got those detectives and those investigators in one room and you started to staff those cases, they started to hear, and Mr. Hall, you probably can follow me a little bit closer and you speak this language, but they started to hear commonality in the crime type. And a perfect example of what happened when law enforcement communities were not talking to each other, and when I pressed and pressed and pressed to get us to the table, we had a rape that occurred in Port Wentworth, a rape that occurred in Savannah. An individual was released from prison in October of 2013. In December of 2013, this man raped 2 students on the campus of Savannah State University in their own apartment. It was a horrific account. Not that any rape is not horrific, but that man, because that case was being handled by GBI, and there was no communication with Savannah Metro and Port Wentworth, it wasn't until he was successful at raping and killing a woman in Port Wentworth and then coming back to Savannah Chatham and raping a woman on her way to work on a Sunday morning, a nurse at Cameron Hospital. Well, I would like to say that from where I was sitting, that case really didn't gain traction until the woman in Savannah, the nurse who was going to work at Cameron Hospital, was raped. But the only DNA evidence that was found that really was able to put this man away was the evidence in the case of the 2 Black girls at Savannah State, one of the Black victims at Savannah State University. So when law enforcement is not communicating, we do have missed opportunities. And what does that missed opportunity mean? Is it just a missed opportunity? No. That missed opportunity could mean that somebody could lose their life. Another person could experience a very horrific crime. So I commend the district attorney for pulling together those individuals within law enforcement, and I'm hopeful that they will be successful at their goals, but we have to do our job. They can't just be working over here on the law enforcement and judicial side if we are not working on those structural pieces, those foundational pieces, because we will just continue to create this breeding ground for gun violence.
Let me ask you something, Alderwoman, and that's law enforcement doing the same thing as our elected officials operating in silos. And do you think that it would help us? Well, I do. I don't know how you feel. If somebody in leadership, either the mayor of Savannah, which is the seat of the county, or the Chatham County Commissioner chair, would call everybody into a meeting to have one silo instead of many. Everybody operating, all 9 county commissioners, all 9 city, all the mayor of every municipality and all of their council people, everybody in the building at once talking about this instead of partying. The only time they get this together is when they have the Chatham Municipal Association thing and they all get there to party. We need them all operating, the school board, the board of elections, the damn dog catcher they elected. Everybody in the same room talking about the issues and the problems, and that's the only way that we're going to solve things right. But when everybody's operating in silos and not communicating and being collaborative on these issues, then we're going to continue to have problems. Won't be one channel.
Well, I don't know if that is really achievable or attainable, but I can surely say it's very honorable and noble. And I'm not a hopeless person. I have hope that one day we will arrive at a place where some semblance or a fraction of that could happen, particularly given the fact that we are in such a crisis here in our city. I know Mr. Abram is probably like, yeah, good luck with that, because Atlanta being, far greater than what we are here in Savannah in size, I'm sure you have that same dynamic in your city as well. But we can only be the change that we want to see. But to that point, I cannot stress enough. When I was on the campaign trail, I said to the citizens of Savannah who I was asking for their vote that I was going to educate them, advocate for them, and fight for them. And education is a big part of it. And I feel like we've done a great deal. But in that education, we just need you to now engage. The one thing that's been the greatest surprise to me is I did not realize that I would still need the citizens. And I had this little tagline I would say on the campaign trail that went something like this: come with me to City Hall, or send me to City Hall and come with me. I didn't really know, just as if the same as with not for sale. It just was a thought God imparted in my head at 3:00 in the morning. I was like, okay, we'll go with that slogan, not for sale. Come with me to City Hall. Well, I have had to resist, those little pawns they put out there to try to snatch you up. And that's what that not for sale is like. No, I don't need it. I don't want it. I don't need another car. If one of mine is broken, I'll just hop in the other one. I don't need an addition added on to my home. I don't need a car account at Christ. I don't need any of that. Bless God. Do I want it? Yes. But do I need it to the detriment of the constituency I came to work on behalf of? And so it pains me now that I've asked citizens to go to the polls and vote. We now have to ask them to engage. I now have to say, come out to the Weeping Time Coalition meeting at 4:00 every Sunday so that we can fight to preserve the Weeping Time land. I now have to say, if you can't watch our city council meetings live on Facebook, pull it up on your Savannah government TV, or go to the archives on the city website and watch it and listen for yourself. And then you will start to hear that what you are reading in the paper and seeing on the news is very different from what actually happened at the meeting. Or the other dynamic you'll get is, well, what they reported on the news really wasn't as important as what they presented in the meeting. So, it's a lot to ask, but it's a fun educational experience. It's exhausting. This work has really changed me a lot, but we're not going to give up on Savannah.
One of and Julius, what you were mentioning is something that I'm not sure how many counties, cities do this, but Athens, Clarke County has exactly what you're talking about, which is that unified government. I don't know how well it works for them, but and nor do I know how long it's been there, but they do operate under that one unified government model. And from when I was living there, it seemed to work out well. And I think we tried it here one time where we consolidated the law enforcement, the police departments with Chatham and Savannah. Now, while I don't have the real evidence to speak on the relationship, we saw how long that lasted. And so, I think a lot of times what it comes down to, and Jay Jones tells me this a lot, people don't want to yield power, right? And so if you're going to take my power away, and I feel like you're taking my blocks out of my crib, I'm going to start crying and whining and all of that. And so when people start realizing it's about the people, you start realizing that that's as far as your power will allow you to go, is when you're advocating for the people in the right way. But if we could talk about this, and Aaron, I would love to start with you on this question. One of the things I advocate for, and I've seen in certain states and certain places like Atlanta, is this focus on real violent crime. I'm so sick. First of all, marijuana is not a drug. Let's get that out of the way. But Atlanta has stopped ticketing for stuff like that and arresting for people for stuff like that. When are we going to realize that we need to start focusing on violent crimes and stop putting folks in jail and all this silly stuff that's going on, and really focus and drill down and start spending resources on things that really don't hurt people. So what are your thoughts about that, Aaron? And we'll go to the Alderwoman and Julius. I would love your comments on this as well.
Well, just from a budgetary perspective, smaller offenses, it's patting the pockets of the local government. It costs money when if you get a DUI or something like that. You have to pay all this money, and it's crazy when you see like there was on Camp Creek Parkway last weekend, there were like 15 cops. They basically did a stop and arrested like almost 100 people. They ticketed people. They wrote all these citations, did all this stuff. And so it's like, okay, well, that's great, I guess. But if you take that attention and time into, surveying the cities, so, this violent repeat offenders, putting more emphasis on watching, like the example that the Alderwoman just gave about this gentleman who was released from prison and then basically went on to be a serial rapist. Okay, well, what are we doing to focus and hone in on people who are more likely to repeat these crimes and be repeat offenders? So you have some people who have already committed two crimes of a similar offense or of a similar nature. And so, what are we doing to focus on those types of things? I think a big part of it is that there is a disparity of resources by design. And so, where are we going to focus our attention? Well, are we going to put more beat cops out, or are we going to put more detectives? Are we going to finance? Which types of programs are we going to finance? Which types of infrastructure and personnel we're going to finance? And I think those things are by design. People who, especially in a city like Atlanta, we had, being a mayor in Atlanta is similar to being a senator in other places, because Atlanta is such a powerful city. And so I think in large part that, and even taking it a step further, maintaining a certain level of crime and portraying the narrative that crime looks like a certain type of people is beneficial to another type of people.
Oh God, yeah.
And so you have these. So I think that, and I pretty much keep beating the same drum about this issue, is that now that things are starting to look different, and it's impacting certain communities. Now it's getting the attention. And so what's going to happen is that if these things go forward and it becomes successful and efficient in some way, and nothing's perfect, we know that, my concern is that it's going to impact communities that already have resources and already have the ability to do things on their own and didn't need government assistance, but want it anyway. And so, why isn't there a focus on it? I think because it's beneficial to certain people to not be focused on that, if that makes sense. Like that's my all around the way answer for it. But I don't know. I mean, it's a problem that I think now that we are uncovering it, having it being a part of the conversation is always valuable. I think, Alderwoman, what of everything that you said, I wrote down a couple of things, having value in the communities and having people understand their value in the community. And that, your value beyond your vote, like, you matter. And the whole reason why we have elected officials is because we have people that need to be governed. And so those people, you can be governed while you can be a part of your governance, and so you want people to understand that and to educate people in that. But also another point is also this idea of having a symbiotic relationship. Like, we are all connected, and so we're all responsible for what happens, and how it happens. And so those things, I think, when you have people in their silos, like we see that all the time. You see it at work, you see it in government. And we also see that it's not beneficial. It doesn't matter where you are. It's not beneficial. It doesn't impact change positively anyway. And so having people focus on having a plan to combat things that are in crisis, but also what's the ongoing effort we're going to make. like you said, we have some short-term things we need to do, but what's going to be the longitudinal approach to these things? And so I think you have to have people who are interested in doing that. And so Atlanta and Atlanta and the Black population just happens to benefit from the non-Black population wanting to combat this issue. And so how it's all going to play out, not sure. I'll be watching from Texas, of course, but I'm excited to see what's going to happen, because the city of Atlanta does impacts the entire metro Atlanta area. DeKalb County, Douglas County, Clayton County, and so even up to Forsyth County. So it matters. And so if we had officials in these areas take a direct approach to addressing issues and disparities of resources as it pertains to violent crimes, then you'll see that change happen across the entire region, I think.
Alderwoman.
Yes, Mr. Abram, you sound like you've been paying attention to what's going on here in Savannah too, because you hit on two themes. One thing you said in particular was you have some people, you are afraid of us arriving at a place where we need to be because individuals who don't need the resources or shouldn't have the resources, they benefit. Mm-hmm. And the ones who do need it won't get it. Well, we had a similar situation like that happen here in Savannah with the CARES Act funds that were dedicated for our small businesses. $2.9 million was released to Savannah in the first wave of funding via the CARES Act. 1.2 million of that 2.9 was dedicated to help support small struggling businesses during COVID. Well, a few council members and myself received many calls from local business owners saying, what's the status of my application? I haven't heard anything. Long story short, we learned that of the 42 to 50 businesses, only 2 were African American who had received up to $50,000. And of the businesses that were on the book and selected, these were businesses that had pre-existing loans with our SBA. So essentially, those funds were used to wipe out the loan balances of loans that were on the books pre-COVID. But we are turning away families at these nonprofit organizations and United Way because your lights were delinquent, your water bill was delinquent before COVID, so we can't help you. So you have that type of disparity and inequity, and it's a lot of truth to what you said. And then the other piece is related to, do we really want to solve this problem? Because if we really solve the problem, who is it going to hurt? Well, here in Savannah, if we really were to increase wages, if we really were to hold these players and partners accountable, our tourism industry wouldn't be what it is. And so there's no real benefit in us helping to educate our citizens, help them with upward mobility with regard to professions and careers as opposed to jobs, because we won't be able to continue to feed this plantation we call tourism, right? And so do we want to forego our tourist opportunity here? No, we relish in how well we are doing, but we have been doing well for a long time. Well enough to share the wealth to the extent where everybody who has everything all the time, you can't keep it all the time. And it's not even about being liberal and giving resources. We're talking about allocating those resources to their intended purposes. And so there's an adage that goes, when the big ship comes in, the whole tide rises, or all the boats rise up. But here in Savannah, when that big ship comes in through our corridors and our waterways, the little ships just get splashed away. And so what we're trying to do is not level the playing field so much as we are trying to just say, give people an opportunity at life. At this point in Savannah, it's all about your life, staying alive.
Alderwoman, and that brings me to this point of saying the certain things like If you give somebody an opportunity, that means that you get rid of the status quo.
Mm.
Effectively, you have to get rid of the status quo to give somebody else an opportunity. They don't want to get rid of the status quo. When you talk resources, then you have to look at whether the leadership that's over those resources is doing what needs to be done. A lot of resources are wasted. With the we say that we need more police officers to do this and to patrol this area, but I was on River Street recently and I saw 10 police officers walking together. What the hell 10 police officers walking together for? And when I was on the police department, my lieutenant better not cock 10 of us together. Ever. Unless we were fighting. That's the only time 10 of us were together. You had to be fighting. You don't put 10 officers on River Street and have them all in the same place. Somebody got shot down there that same night, a couple of hours after I left. 10 officers walking together before that, together. Instead of 2 here, 2 down this way, 2 here. You got to spread it out. It's resources that you're throwing away. You look at officer pull another a citizen over on the highway. Then 3 and 4 officers there. What the hell 3 or 4 officers doing at one stop? 3 or 4 cars you see at one stop. Every stop? No, that's a waste of resources. That officer could be in his district patrolling, stopping one of these drive-bys or something. Preventing some type of other crime. It's resources. It's leadership also. If you don't have the vision and you don't have the people that's going to do right with the resources, then it's all going to go to waste. And all we're going to do is sit back and complain. But we need to change a lot of things in this city, in this county. We need to change a whole lot of things.
And Mr. Hall, to that point, I want to just say to those who are listening, what we have demonstrated here today and what we're talking about is not difficult. It's not unattainable. A lot of what we have introduced and presented today is happening in communities. There are some communities who are actually fairly successful in having harmony in their community and in their neighborhoods. But when we relegate what's not happening to the fact that council members and commissioners and state representatives are not getting along or they're not on the same page, we do a disservice to really focusing on the issue. And where I'm concerned, I can speak for our local government, our Savannah municipality, our administration. For in excess of 25 years, I had a very good track record and a stellar record of performance when it came to running nonprofit organizations, which I thought this was a hard job. That was a hard job, but this is the hardest job. Nonprofit leaders, kudos to you. People who run nonprofit organizations, especially those small ones, they have a tough task ahead. And so when we look at what we've done over the years, surely coming to City Hall now, this essentially should be a cakewalk. But when I'm asked to collaborate, negotiate, network, and bargain collectively for things like poverty, crime, economic drivers, wages, things that people want for their neighborhoods, where do I start? We're either gonna work on crime reduction or we're not. We're either gonna work on poverty reduction or we're not. We're either gonna introduce and propose legislation that's gonna bring us close to our citizens earning livable wages, or we're not. It's not this whole notion that the media has created that we're not getting anything done because we can't work together. No, it's not us disagreeing on how to eradicate poverty and crime in our community, or we're not disagreeing on which way we're going to increase wages. We're just not doing it at all. Those are not discussions we have as a council. In fact, we have very little discussions on anything related to how to move the needle in this community. So I thank you for this platform and this time, just to say, if we are really interested in doing anything about crime in Savannah, or anywhere else. It starts with citizens looking at the real evidence of what is and what is not being done and holding your elected officials accountable. Do not get caught up in smoke screens, gaslighting, and majoring in those minor things. You know, my new thing now is why, when people ask me, why can't you all get along? I tell them the same reason why Biden and Trump didn't get along. We're not on the same team.
That's right.
That's right.
That's right.
As a
And
matter of
people
fact,
got to
that's a
choose
great
sides.
that's a great segue. You mentioned this, and I want the viewers to hear this process because it's so important. And the reason why it's important, you shared some real tangible ideas, and you're not being heard. And we heard Julius mention it earlier. Some of the other alderwomen are not being heard. And that's, if you could elaborate more on that agenda process, how that looks and how that silences voices. So if you can't get on the agenda, you can't discuss an issue. And that's because, like you said, people are not on the same team because they don't want to fight crime or they don't want to pour resources in communities, and they rather help their folks like Kessler down at Plant Riverside, which happens to be a favorite place of mine. But still, we have a national crisis, a city crisis. If you could talk to us about that agenda process and how if you all are not allowed to control that narrative or be on an agenda, how that silences voices and restricts real progress.
Voter
Yeah, and
suppression.
it does exactly what you just said. It silences the voice of the voters because I don't go to sleep and wake up in the middle of the night with an agenda idea. I basically live my life through the experience of the people I represent. So when I see that they have a problem, the way this is supposed to work by way of our charter as an elected official who represents the entire city of Savannah, I'm supposed to be able to access our municipal process by introducing legislation that would be consistent with making a difference or a change with a problem I have identified through my constituency. And I do that by presenting it to our city manager, who is the chief executive officer of our city. That city manager can come back to me with various recommendations on how he or she would solve the problem. The council votes on it, we adopt it, and it's implemented. And then you have a change that's consistent with helping us enjoy a community of harmony. But that, in fact, is not how it's happening. There was a display just during our last meeting where I called the city manager to the carpet because there was one council member who introduced, Nick Palumbo introduced aluminum cups. We have not discussed or talked about aluminum cups as a council since I've been on council. And so I get the agenda and this item is here. I'm like, wait a minute, well, who, what, where is this coming from? And he waffles over the question when I asked him who introduced the initiative, who is responsible for the item. And he didn't answer me initially. And when I pressed, he became frustrated and lashed out and said, well, it gets on the agenda just like all of you can put something on the agenda. It's like, excuse me, sir. You know, I don't get caught up in ageism, but I'm thinking, are we having a senior moment here? Because that's just not the way things are happening in Savannah. And so
A senior moment or a color moment, one of the two.
you have to ask the question, why is this? Why is it? And so until we remove these rules, and this is a rule of council that was established within the first 3 months of all that was going on in Savannah, in the first 3 months of our time on council, of all that was going on, we were actually in a crime crisis our first quarter as elected officials. We had eclipsed the number of homicides that we had in the previous year. And so amidst all of that, the only thing we could come up with, the mayor introduced a rule of council that will change the way we introduce legislation. And that change was deliberate because they saw. And when we speak of they, it's like everybody's like, who is they? They are these 3 or 4 imaginary men who not only run Savannah, but who run our local government. They saw that they had a group of progressive and aggressive policymakers. That's what your older people are supposed to be. They're supposed to be policymakers. I can appreciate shaking hands and kissing babies. I love babies. I can appreciate that more than the next person. But photo ops and all of those pieces, and showing up at events and eating people's food, that's not my favorite thing to do. My favorite thing to do is to do the work, put the time in, so that the differences are made that we talked about on the campaign trail. And if we are not doing that, we're just spinning our wheels and wasting our time. And that's why, again, I'm just appealing to the public to say, I need you to pay attention. I need you to get involved. I need you to make demands. We didn't find out until last week, Monday or Tuesday, that $27 million is sitting in the bank, is sitting in the coffers of the city of Savannah. I don't know who's our favorite banker, who has all of that money, but we just found out that those funds were released to Savannah via the American Relief Fund. And so why such a secret? Why are these things happening in a vacuum? Why are you continuously leaving the policymakers out? Because this policymaker, what I would be inclined to do is to connect with my constituency via a town hall and have a conversation. Oh, and by the way, I was denied an opportunity to use city resources and staff to host a town hall meeting to talk to my constituents. But there's more than one way to skin a cat. We'll get to it. But so you see, it's like, why are we deliberately, ask the question, why is there a deliberate intent to close a process that was once open? This has never happened with any council ever in the history of Savannah since we have had a council manager form of government. So it now takes me to get the consensus of 5 council members. That's how many votes you need to get an item passed. Not only do I need 5 council members to vote to pass an item, I now am tasked with getting 5 council members to provide consent to get it introduced on the agenda. And even in my attempt to follow that process, it's fallen on deaf ears. And again, when you ask the question, make sure you get an answer. And what answer is that? Does the answer make sense? Yes, it makes sense. The deliberate intent to close me out, surely I'm not going to propose legislation to have me go on a shopping spree and buy my clothes for council, or to help out my favorite friend down the street with their business. No, because that's going to be public. But if I say we want to allocate X number of resources to create and expand on our recreation department for our Little League footballers, the babies who's going to be most impacted by this gun violence, and we are approaching this from a longitudinal approach. And if those 5 people, your mayor, Nick Palumbo, Curtis Purdy, Linda Wilder Bryant, and Dietrich Leggett, if they vote it down, like they've been voting up things that benefit individuals who are not vulnerable, they will be indicted in the public, and the public will then see. And Mr. Hall, this is what I need you and other ATR shows, as well as Better Savannah and the others. You see what we are competing against in the media. You see the challenges we have in the attacks that the Adam Van Bremers of the world and the Raina Cashes of the world. You see what the affiliates and the leaders of TLC, SAV, and JCL and Fox, you see what they are doing to us. And so when you all talk about City Hall and you talk about City Council, unless you really mean it, I want you to name my name for what you mean. But don't dare group me. Don't group me and don't say council. And some have said, well, we'll just do better with starting all over again. Just vote the whole council out. I will be fine with that if you name the names. But if you just say council, you're vicariously grouping me. And I feel passionate about this because I am devoting everything I have to this job. I think I am the most criticized and scrutinized council member because by all accounts, I'm the biggest threat. I don't know why. But we're here for it all. When we have people who say they're for us and you're working with us, we need you to show some signs. Thank you.
Yeah, and to our show, we have a show engineer. Give us about 15 more minutes, Crystal, because I want to dive in this a little further. It alarms me that, when we talk about our city manager, Aaron, it's a city manager that we brought back from when I was a child. Now I'm 43 years old. Okay. But this is the
I didn't
same. I
say
don't
that.
know if
You
he was
said
around
it.
then, but if we don't start implementing real ideas like we heard today, we're going to be back in a place, I think some years ago, and I'm not going to call names because I don't need anybody after me. But when Bill Clinton instituted the three-strike sure outlaw, there was a major crime issue in Savannah where people were literally getting killed on a daily basis, and I'm not exaggerating. And so when we have a city manager that restricts ideas, how many of us want to take a step back? Right? So let's put that in perspective. When you have a city manager who has that much authority and power, and we have people that look like us who won't advocate for us, we're taking steps back, folks, right? And so we've got to find ways to either A, tell Mr. Brown to go home, go ahead and retire, we'll figure this out, and find a manager and leaders who can be progressive, not be liberal, but be progressive. Because right now we're in a situation where there is no light at the end of the tunnel, and we have leaders of the ship who are driving us into the ocean, like sinking. And I agree. When we've got to start naming names. I don't have a problem naming names because you can't come from me because I didn't send for you one. But how do we get around that? Because we've got to find ways to tell those who don't get it to wake up. And I'll use this example. I talk about Yammer all the time. And for the aldermen over there who just, I don't either you blind, deaf, or dumb, but when you don't understand what's going on in your face, and you sit there and you don't understand gentrification going on, I don't. Either you're lying or you just don't get it. And so what I'm trying to figure out is, Julius, how do we get around this so that we stop allowing someone to play these plantation games?
Well, I think that's a great question, and this is not going to sound very good. It's not palatable when I say it out loud. But plain and simple, Mr. Bryant, I get when people vote party affiliation with regard to Democrat or Republican. It doesn't make much sense on the municipal level because infrastructure, it doesn't matter if you have an infrastructure issue, if you're Democrat or Republican. Crime, Democrat or Republican. It's not Democrat crime. It's not Republican crime. Poverty, it's we get caught up in the semantics of politics. And we just need to slow it down and dial it back and recognize the shift in our culture where politics is concerned, and recognize that even to the extent of voting for someone who looks like you, who is the same hue. And as of late, from where I'm sitting, because we have a Black leader in the form of a mayor, Black elitism, the stain of Black elitism, it's just as bad as racism. Because we know better. And we know up front, personal and close, what this is and what it feels like. It's just like, it's hard to believe that 90% of child molestation is relegated to a family member or a friend. 60% is a friend or an acquaintance, and 60% is a family member, uncle, brother, cousin. 30% is an acquaintance, a coach, teacher, somebody at the church. Only 10% of child molestation is at the hands of a stranger. 90% the child knows the person. How egregious and offensive is that? And it becomes more egregious and offensive because that child is oftentimes not going to say anything when it first starts to happen because it's happening at the hands of somebody they know and love. And so they don't want the person to get in trouble or go away. They just want the nastiness and the violence to stop, right? And so when you make that parallel, and forgive me for this example, with politics, we vote politicians in who look like us, who talk like us, who are from where we are, and we think they understand, only to have them get into office and we allow them to trade off our close proximity by way of relationship, friendship, and kinship in exchange for what they and their friends and buddies can have. The city of Savannah's leadership and administrations are just, the Black administrations are just as guilty as the whites as lacing the pockets of friends helping friends and buddies.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the greatest atrocity done to the citizens of Savannah and our vulnerable communities. For 30 plus years, 3 or more decades, this city has had African American leadership at almost every level. In some regard, all at the same time. Black mayor, Black county commissioner, majority council, majority commission, Black police chief. The only one that wasn't Black was the sheriff. Black city managers, blackity black, 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 black. And what did that get us? So I'm saying stop getting caught up in those pieces and focus on people who really have a demonstrated track record of being steady. It's not so much your experience and what you've done, but just being steady. There's a lot to be said for being grounded, rooted, unmovable, and always abounding. And it's very, very difficult to find those people. And that's why we had that problem you demonstrated. So I say to you, don't get caught up because I played a piano at your church, or your mama was my daddy's principal, or we went to Tompkins High School in 1976.
That's the world.
Is that school?
Yeah. But Kesha, Alderwoman Carter, a couple of things. We have to be able to, in order to do what you just asked, we have to identify those people first. Mm-hmm. If we can't identify those people, then, we always choose the lesser of two evils, and sometimes we find out that the person that we chose is just as evil. But
you're right.
But our main problem within our community is engagement. Mm-hmm. We have to stay focused and involved. If we don't do that, see, they know our pattern, so they know how to play us. Mm-hmm. If we're only going to pay attention for one day, they know how long to hold out. Right. We don't have that staying power to do the things necessary to get the job done. We have to be able to be involved and engaged with each other. If we don't do that, they win every time. And those guys those 4 guys that you was talking about, they aren't imaginary. They're just invisible. They're there, know. Yeah. So they are running things.
And Aaron, I want to shift. We talk about this when our folks get in positions of power and they forget who they are, what they're rooted in. I look at the mayor's race in Atlanta, and I want to get your thoughts on that as we close out. But we see Kasim Reed coming back, and while I'm proud of some of the things Kasim did, I am also looking at some of the bullshit he created and patting people's pockets and some of the stuff we saw at the end. So we're going to not close out with that, but that'll kind of be our last topic. But what are your thoughts about that piece and how that could impact the progress of the Metro Atlanta area?
It can adversely. I mean, who becomes the mayor of Atlanta and people not focusing on the city and what the city needs is, going to have a lasting impact. So Atlanta has had a Black mayor since 1975, I believe. Since Maynard, it's been a Black mayor. But the demographic of the city has changed. Atlanta used to be it's still a predominantly African American city, but the demographic is changing and that gap is closing. So where it used to be 70-30, then it was 65-35. Now it's only 55-45. So the gap is closing as more people are attracted to move into Atlanta And so what happens is you see a shift in priorities and a shift in who gets served. And so it's almost, I mean, even from the last election with Norwood and Mayor Bottoms, the city was split. I mean, North voted for Mary, South voted for Kesha.
Mm-hmm.
And so, well, that's going to become a problem when we don't have people in the place in the position that is going to allocate those resources appropriately. You see schools on the north end. We know that funding for schools comes from property taxes. Well, you have these $1 million homes, these beautiful homes in the northern part of the city, and then you have different types of housing or no housing in a lot of places. And so there's no funding going into there's no resources going into schools. So you're starting to see those things. Well, the mayor's job, at least to lay people, is to leverage the power of resources in the city to ensure that people are served in the right ways. And so what you have is people who are no longer interested in serving the people. They've crossed this threshold of elitism and classism and access, and that's what their focus is. And so this next mayoral race is going to be very interesting because you have a couple of candidates who have all had legal issues, or their names have been in some ways been involved in malfeasance and issues with finances and embezzlement or whatever. Whether they've been convicted or not, they're still, for a lot of people, perception is reality. And so, are you responsible? Are you going to be responsible with the resources and what power you have and what power you wield as a mayor? And are you going to be responsible to the people? And so, but unfortunately, people vote by popularity. They vote by the names. They vote if it's it's just a black person, whatever. And so that's what you all mentioned, and that's the things that we're running into. But it's so much more at stake now that people don't understand, because there is quietly and silently a group of people who are trying to take over what's going to happen in Atlanta and for whom they're willing to serve. And so Atlanta has a huge disparity of wealth and income. As more people are moving here, you have more students are graduating from Georgia State, Georgia Tech, Georgia, but they're coming to the Metro Atlanta area or staying in the Metro Atlanta area, and not having access to decent paying jobs. Atlanta is a city that's very much so about who you know, and it's incumbent upon the elected officials to ensure that people are going to be served in the right way. So to your point of your question about what that's going to look like, and potentially with Mayor Reed hopping back in the race, or we know he is going to run again. I don't think that's good for the city, and we've seen what happened the last time he was a mayor. I mean, even in his treatment of Mayor Bottoms, before she became mayor, it's just like, okay, well, why would we trust this person to do more harm than they already did? Whether or not he was indicted and or found guilty of anything, there was some misappropriation of your power. And why would we allow that to happen again? It's really kind of where I stand with it. But I mean, you will have a lot of people that will vote for him just from the association of his name. I mean, he left being a congressman to become the mayor of Atlanta. That's a testament to how powerful it is to be the mayor of Atlanta and what that means.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to yield my time for closing comments. So we'll go with closing comments, and we thank both Alderwoman Gibson Carter of Savannah and Aaron Abram, who I did not mention this earlier, who will be entering law school. Aaron, if you could remind me the school, forgive me.
Sure. I'll be at Texas Southern University, Thurgood Marshall School of Law. So it's one of 5 HBCU law schools.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we wish you luck. We'll have you back, but he has a great thought process and a great legal mind, and so we have a future attorney here. So final comments from you all.
Let Aaron go.
Well, all I can say is now that I've been invited to the show, I will be tuned in to what's going on in Savannah. So, but I do hope that you all can get to a place, and I believe that it'll happen because you have people dedicated to ensuring that it's going to happen. It may be small progress, but progress is still progress, and so that's what I wish the most for you all. Stay the course. It's amazing to be among people who actually care and who are unrelentless. I guess relentless. Excuse me. In your approach, and you're not going to be bullied out by what's going on. So stay the course. Like I said, I'm invested in you all's future and what's going to happen. Um, maybe what's happening in Atlanta, you can take pieces from that, or hey, we don't know. But as long as we're having a conversation about it, and as long as we're moving in the right direction, like we said, this violent crime is a crisis across the entire nation, and it impacts our communities differently. So hopefully, we can see some sustainable change very soon. And I don't doubt that you all will be responsible for that in some way. Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Alderwoman.
I would just like to say thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for the investment you all make into community as well. I know it's not easy following City Hall and County Commission and paying attention to what's going on in the state level. It takes a lot of time that you all invest to stay so relevant. So we really appreciate you and embrace this opportunity to just create another narrative and equalize we're not only equalizing it, we're winning over the mainstream media. So we appreciate that. And vote Julius Hall for mayor of Fort Wentworth.
Yes. And donate, contribute. We got to buy signs.
Thank you, Alderwoman. Robert, you got any closing words?
No, I'm going to yield my time to the guests.
Okay, and I thank y'all for coming on. We appreciate it. I'm sure we'll have y'all back. Good luck in law school, Aaron. If you need anything, you know where to call Robert.
I'm not the best fundraiser, you see.
And we might need a good city attorney here in Savannah or Fort Wentworth. You never know. So get ready. I just want to tell everybody, we put these shows on so we can try to inform our listening public and our viewers. And we want you to understand that the information that we give is unfiltered. We're not trying to be anybody's friend. What we're trying to do is give you the truth. We're trying to wake people up. A lot of people have blinders on. They have them on for a reason because just like the old woman said, you play the piano at my church or you sing real good or you are my baby goddaddy or whatever it is. You my ex-boyfriend or whatever it is. And, a lot of people have these blinders on. We don't care about somebody that's selling out our community. Those days are over. We're going to speak up. It doesn't matter what the price that we pay. We're going to keep speaking up. We're in this for the long haul, but we need you all to join us. We need you to join Alderwoman Kesha Gibson Carter, Alderwoman Alicia Miller Blakely, Alderwoman Bernetta Bryant Lanier. We need you to join these people because they're fighting for you. They don't need you fighting against them. They don't need you praising somebody who they're fighting when they're fighting for you. And this show is the same way. These shows, what we put on, we're not going to put. We'll let anybody tell their stories, just about. But if you come on this show, we're going to put it to you, and you're going to get the hard questions. That's the way that we have it here. If I can't give you the hard questions, then Robert will. But anyway, appreciate y'all coming out.
Yes, we
y'all
appreciate
stay tuned. We got Pastor Leonard Smalls tonight. Tell it like it is. 6 p.m. Y'all make sure y'all watch 6 p.m. Unity Action Committee. Unity Political Action Committee, I believe. Something like that. Yeah. So y'all watch that at 6 p.m. And 5 p.m. tomorrow we have his and her perspective. And Alderwoman, don't you have John Eves, Secretary of State candidate on your show on Monday? And
Yes,
who
sir.
else? Anybody else?
Whoever else you tell me to put on there.
Okay. I'll be around.
Listen, I'm trying to be Alderwoman. I'm trying to be Alderwoman.
We want you to wear 12 hats at the same time.
Okay, so we appreciate y'all coming, and we'll see y'all next Saturday on this show. But y'all tune in to All Things Relevant Media on Facebook, ATR Black Media Network on YouTube, and y'all can catch all our shows. Good afternoon, everybody.
All right, y'all have a great one now. Take care.
Thank you.
Good night,
Bye-bye.
Savannah. I love you.